a kind of a suburban logic of petit bourgeois habitation into a public institution. And as I said, our problem is how to turn settlements into what they were not designed to be. No, not as gated communities for the Palestinian rich, reproducing power hierarchies in space, but how to unlock their potential to become public institutions. So for us, the surface has become incredibly important, perhaps through that image. And we thought about the first attitude, or perhaps the first motion, is to erase the surface, to erase the difference between public, private, road, sidewalk, public park, etc., and leave a kind of a neutral surface that would allow this kind of connectivity between, or different type of connectivity between the buildings. We call it the kind of the urbanism of the first 15 centimeters, and understanding somehow that although we are speaking about transformation of architecture, architecture is sometimes very dumb, and we know from history and from many examples that a church could be a synagogue, surely, but it could be a mosque, and a mosque could be that, but it could be a discotheque as well, and it could be a school, and everything can turn into everything. A space is, but where ideology is prescribed, and where there is a level of regulation and control which is much more prescriptive, is in the surface, right? Where you can walk, where you cannot walk, what is private, what is public. The surface is much more powerful as a regulating of action than the house itself, And even local knowledge could help transform the house itself. So in fact, that kind of urbanism of the first 15 centimeters, intervening in that differentiation between grass, paving, road, etc., has become a kind of important, sort of aspect in our work, and produces a kind of perhaps images of other possible kind of intervention and reuse, whether it is in the covering of that by the landscape again, and creating a kind of smoothness that would connect that, undoing the sort of hierarchy within the settlement, or any other thing. We are still kind of working, obviously, on the kind of specificities of that in various moments, but the idea that it kind of it puts architectures really as object, diffused, separated, just scattered on the surface itself, etc. So, another thing that all of a sudden we have discovered, and we thought incredibly important for us to refer to, is Palestinian ownership. One of the ways in which colonialism worked traditionally, and definitely in the context of Israel-Palestine, is in erasing the level of land ownership, surface ownership, and replacing it with another system. We've been able to trace this rather rare map that we found actually in Jordan of land ownership in that hill. That is where the settlement is, Psagot, right? This is where Ramallah is, and this is where the settlement is. As you see, it's fragmented into various fields that Palestinians owned before the occupation. Some of them are public, some of them are private, right? And we found it necessary to actually find the landowners that own these pieces of land. So all of a sudden, this mountain became at the center of various orbits of extraterritoriality. We started finding, the owners in various other parts of the world. In Canada, in Australia, in the U.S., various cities in the U.S., in Jordan, in Palestine, next door, etc. It became a sort of a microcosm of the scattering of the Palestinian people from the land, whereas the Jews that came into that themselves came from all over the world. Russian Jews, French Jews, Algerians, etc. Americans, a lot of Americans from Brooklyn. So that hill became a kind of a microcosm in this sort of various orbits of extraterritoriality that was around it. And we enjoyed as well the way in which this land division, in fact, so aggressively cut through the built logic of the settlement itself. Look, those fragments are rather abstract, and we decided to take them very serious, those particular fragments, knowing that Palestinian families not very often do not give up their, whether this area would return, the particular family-owned field, etc. And then you have a field on which there is 7.5 houses, or 13 3/4, of homes, etc. There's a kind of a disturbance of the logic, and we wanted to think it through those through those fragments, no? Both tracing their ownership and kind of seeing how these and various owners, etc. What is that? Oh, there's no sound? But understanding that idea of this mountain, this hilltop standing at the center of these orbits of extraterritoriality, we in fact did not want to repeat this idea of radical expulsion, this kind of expulsions of population on both sides of a newly imposed international border. And in fact try even to build connection with settlers there and see whether there is a kind of any possibility that any future of that would include, although this is not within the domain of architecture, but we did not want to exclude that possibility. So here, rather kind of, I think, heartfelt interview with a settler woman who is there, who is describing living in this situation of imminent kind of expulsion. You know? Every moment she feels she would be taken off her home. No. Maybe the other.
No,
okay, now it will go. No. Okay, leave it. I mean, I think we are short on time. So, anyway, she's basically talking about fearing, people coming into her home. No. But what would happen if those public fragments, and this is what you see here in red, fragments of public property that would remain and perhaps could become the seed of what we were calling of that a series of public institutions. So if Ramallah would expand, in fact, into it, those would remain as kind of island of suburbia within the expanded city. So these are kind of cut out of public plots, of lands that is public, as I said, sometimes cutting through buildings themselves, which would remain as the kind of the seed for any sort of public institution that would occupy them. And then the problem is becoming just rather mundane, a problem of densifying that, of creating perhaps one structure out of a scattering of domestic repetitive shells, whether it is a kind of an extension of the shells and a building of the gaps, filling of the gaps between them, which is one of the possibilities we are in fact looking at. As I said before, the architecture of the settlements is very much the architecture of vision. Settlements are optical devices on a suburban scale, and you can see here on the right-hand side, on the top right-hand side, the way in which a settlement master plan before even any house is proposed or built is the views. I mean, the views are designed before the homes come later to actually give them shape. You see it here below, and you see that what is being viewed is always the Palestinian. And when you read settlement brochures, what is very apparent in them is that the landscape is actually always sold as remnant of like biblical landscape. It is always the settlement brochures are talking about come and live in the landscape of the Bible, and what the Bible is in fact for those rather religious Jews who are supposed to come and live there is always defined by the remnant of Palestinian daily life. The kind of their stone terraces and stone houses and donkeys and olive trees, etc., which becomes kind of signifiers for a sort of biblical authenticity. So there's a kind of paradox where on the one hand you oversee to control, while on the other you admire that pastoral landscape. So, and you see here the relationship between the settlement on the mountaintop and the Palestinian underneath, and the opening of all the architecture organized as an optical device to oversee these and extended through CCTV systems, etc. And so what happens? What would happen